Welcome everybody to this year's academic presentations of the Victorian Rifleman Shoot in Bowling Green, Kentucky. First person who will be presenting today is going to be Charles Lemons on the Ward Burton Rifle. With that, I will pass it over to you.
Yeah. Well, first maybe I should tell you how I got this thing. A friend of mine was a Civil War reenactor, and he called me up and he said, "Can you work on some weapons for me?" I said, "Well, yeah, what do you need?" He says, "Well, I need to get them apart." He says, "Well, what have you got?" I said, "I don't know what they are, but I paid like $250 for them." I said, "Where'd you find them?" He found them in a barn. He says, "What do you mean you found them in a barn?" "Well, I had a barn sale, and they had this hat and coat rack." Hat and coat rack? Yeah, 3 guns made into a hat and coat rack. Apparently it was a Bannerman piece. And when they couldn't sell the guns, they had sat there and riveted the bayonets to the ends of the barrels, drilling holes. They had bolted them down to a metal plate and had capped the bayonets with a little ball. So when he handed it to me, he had gotten them apart, but I ended up having to drill out everything. And at the end, I cleaned all the paint off, actually got them so that they would open up and function, and then he gave me one. Of course, I took the one that functioned the best. And that happens to be it right here. This is what is actually known as a model 1871 Springfield, Ward Burton. They only made 1,011 of these rifles, and they made them specially for the small arms testing they were doing in the early 1870s to figure out what was going to replace the trapdoor Springfield. Obviously, they didn't replace the trapdoor Springfield because they weren't happy with everything else. Now, it's a 71. All the other weapons that participated in those tests were all designated Model 1870 Springfields. The reason why they're all designated Springfields is every single one of them had to be built at the Springfield Arsenal in Massachusetts. Why, I don't know. The competitors were the Remington Rolling Block, the Sharps cartridge, and let's see, I've got to look up the last one because I'm not great sometimes in remembering. The Trapdoor, the Remington, and the Sharps. Those are the 3. Those were all designated Model 1870 Springfields. They're all in 50-70 or with the carbines in the 50-55, I believe is what it is. They loaded the bullets a little bit lighter in the carbines. Where did this thing come from? Well, a fellow named Bethel Burton had patented this style of a bolt action back about 1856. And by 1859, he had improved it. Now, the original actually had an exposed hammer with this bolt action, so you could actually load the rounds in the breech. You could even load it down the muzzle because with the outside hammer, it was actually a percussion weapon. The US government wasn't interested, but the Confederate government became interested in 1861. And he was arrested and put in prison for a year for attempting to sell them the rights to the weapon. He got out and he continued to experiment with weapons. By the late 1860s, he had already been trying to sell the weapons overseas to other foreign governments and the like, and they liked it. The patent we see here is about 1868, and this is the straight, it's a cartridge weapon. He made it in several calibers, but none of them sold very well. While he was trying to sell them to the state of New York, he met a man, Colonel Ward, who happened to be the adjutant general there. He became so interested in it, he became a partner with Burton in 1870, and Burton actually shared the patent with him, put his name on the patent he had just given. So by 1870, the US Army was trying to figure out what they were going to do for a new weapon. Would they go with these other systems or what? And apparently Ward, being the Adjutant General of New York, had a little bit of influence. And so in 1871, they added the Ward Burton to the trials. The trials they issued these weapons. Each type of weapon, they made around a little over 1,000 rifles of each type. The Sharps, the trapdoor, and the Remington rolling blocks. Pretty nice. They all had exposed hammers, which made it easy to tell what condition the weapon was in. And that was the problem with these. Even though these were pretty well done, firing well, they didn't fail a lot. They did have some failures. You'll notice on this one there's a small piece missing here because they didn't make them good enough. But ultimately this weapon was not accepted, and the major reason it wasn't accepted was you couldn't tell whether it was loaded or not. And they had quite a few people almost get shot by picking up a weapon that was loaded but you couldn't tell. All the other weapons in the trials had exposed hammers. So you could just tell by where the hammer was whether it was going to shoot or not. On this one you couldn't. The operation is pretty easy. It's like any bolt action. Open it up, take your 45 or your 50-70 round, slide it in. It cocks on closure. Is it loaded? Is it cocked? Can't tell. The safety is the nightmare part. The safety is raising the bolt up to this point and then setting the lock into it. It doesn't work really well because if you don't set the lock, it can fall, it could go. I'm going to pull it dry. They worked every time. They didn't have any complaints on this operation, but they didn't feel it was right, so it didn't get accepted. The other problem with this is, oh no, it gets worse. If you accidentally drop it or you spin this piece, everything falls apart. And if you lose any one of these parts, you can't use it in the field. But otherwise, you can also see how easy it is to clean though. Nothing to it. Lock it in place. And it's ready to go. But this thing, once that turns, from this point here, once it turns this way, everything will come off. Now it's interrupted screw. It's a very strong action. There's really nothing to the weapon at all. This portion here that you see, there's a post that sticks up where the trigger is. That's what holds everything in place. Once you pull the trigger, it flies forward. Once you slide it in, that post, the pin gets locked on it and it pushes it back and cocks it. As I said, they only made 1,011 of them. The bayonet is all off the shelf. It's model 1855 bayonet. The barrels are sleeved 58 caliber barrel. Now they claim they weren't doing that by 1871. This belies it. If you come up and inspect the barrel, you can actually see where it's sleeved. The stock is probably new made, but all of the other fittings on it are straight Springfield, including the butt plate. So the only new portions are the lock itself and the trigger assembly, because it's specialized to the weapon. Even the sights are straight off of the older 1868 pattern trapdoor. Now they made a carbine version of this as well. Apparently, when it didn't get accepted, what they ended up doing was keeping them in the arsenals, and then when Bannerman showed up, they sold them. I went to the 1903 Bannerman catalog. It doesn't show the rifle, but they're still carrying the carbines. They only made 300 of those. So obviously they didn't sell well. Now you can see this thing could be actually used for a magazine loader, and they did make a magazine version of it later on, but they never did sell any of them to any government that I know of. So these things they also made a shotgun version. So Ward Burton did actually sell these weapons, but not this military manner. There's no serial numbers. They were originally finished bright, but because of the conditions this one was kept in, it's now blued. If you'll look at the barrel, you can actually see the holes that they drilled into the barrel to retain the bayonets when they were doing this. Can't really say much more. It's actually a sweet firing weapon. But if you took it out in the field and dropped that bolt, you're not going to find any replacement parts for this thing. The other two weapons that I handed back, one was missing a firing pin and the other one I can't remember what it was missing, but there was no way we were going to get those fixed unless you found someone who could cast these new pieces. I'll entertain questions because, like I said, this is pretty short. The main problem with it was the fact that you could not tell whether it was loaded. Now, the British had weapons at the same time, no exposed hammer, but they put that little piece on the outside just so you could tell whether it was loaded or not. On this one, it probably would have been easy. I've seen some where they actually would drill a hole in the back and put a pin sticking out. And if the pin stuck out so far, you could tell the thing was cocked and loaded. But the soldiers were literally afraid of these in a couple of units. After they'd fired them accidentally and not killed anybody, they were fortunate for that. So, that's all I have. Sir?
So I may have missed it, because I'm fiddling with the audio stuff here.
Aye, aye.
But what was the year of introduction?
The year of introduction, well, 1871. Now, the original patent dates in the 1856, I believe, 1868. They convinced the federal government to take them for the, for the trials, and it was late, 1871, so they didn't get to as much use as the other ones. This one looks kind of crappy because they all look crappy. Every single one of the weapons was issued to field troops, and you can guess what they did with them. So you're not going to really find very nice examples of these weapons around. Probably nicer than this without the holes in the barrel, but they only issued them to about 3 different regiments. Same with the carbines, same with everything. They all went through. Notice though, the trapdoor won versus the Remington, which I'm sure most of us at least handled one, and the Sharps, which all were proven weapons in the field. They wouldn't go for it. I'm not sure why. And it doesn't really say, except that, believe it or not, this thing outshot the other two. The one reason it didn't get accepted, the really major reason, and I can't say this enough, is they couldn't tell whether they were loaded or not. And in that kind of a system, well, how can you tell an M16's loaded? You can't really, but we're used to that kind of thing now. Back then, if you couldn't see the hammer, you had to assume that it was loaded. Or apparently these guys were the opposite. They assumed it wasn't loaded and pulled the trigger.
They were bought by the Confederates? Did the Confederates actually buy and issue them?
That was funny. I had to look that up. The firearm that he was selling initially to the Confederates looks almost exactly like this, but put a Springfield plate on the side with a hammer. There was a spot here that was a percussion. It doesn't state what type of ammo they had. I would have assumed maybe a paper cartridge, but this is still easier than trying to load it down the muzzle. Slid the cartridge in, no firing pin, so all you had to really do was close it. You cocked it, put the percussion cap on and fired it. The other nice thing is if you just left it closed, if you didn't have fixed ammo, you could still muzzle load it. And I thought that was an interesting thing. The Confederates were interested enough, they wanted to buy 40,000 of them. But the Secret Service caught them. They were going to build them probably at Richmond. because that's who approached him for the patent. They picked him up.
Do you know how many they produced?
They produced none. They never got a chance to.
Okay, so just.
They picked him up before he was even able to go south and do it.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was because he was a Confederate. He just wanted to sell guns. And remember, this is 61, so no one was quite sure which direction things were going to go. It didn't get that radical, but I thought that was funny. And I mean, he showed them to everybody. The French, the British. In fact, actually, he even invented a pistol that he has British patents on these things too. And they actually created those, but he never sold anything to the federal government or even to any of the state governments, which is kind of sad. I emphasize that this is the very first bolt action the federal government ever built, the very first one. It isn't until they adopt, what is it, the Krag in the 1890s, that they actually build any bolt action rifles. So this is the very first of many. I don't know, I think the value out on the open market, if you can find one, it's really not that much. They're not a very desirable weapon, probably because they're 50-70. When they adopted the trapdoor again, they went to the 45-70. I think that was already part of the plan, but for the test, everything was equipped with 50-70 rounds. Those are fun to find too. No other questions? Does anybody want to come up and take a look?
Hold on.
Aye, aye, sir.
Anybody online have a question? We're good? Okay.
Well, that's it. Sir?
In carrying that at shoulder arms, would the bolt handle sticking out?
You know, I've never tried that. You know, knowing the drill of the period,
Right. Order arms,
you know, order arms.
shoulder arms.
Actually, it's more convenient because it's right there. But without the safety on, you could accidentally hit the bolt and open it up and eject the casing. And if you were a stupid idiot and accidentally pushed in on the trigger at the same time, I always thought this was funny because I had a friend of mine using an 03 Springfield. And he made them, you know, 03s have a lock. This thing doesn't have a lock to keep it out. Well, he was running with it, and he accidentally slipped it close to his body and put it to neutral, and the bolt fell out. And we spent the next 20 minutes trying to figure out where the bolt had dropped out of his gun after he'd run about 50 yards. So the same thing could occur with this. It had problems. I think they would have all been solvable, and we probably would have had a bolt action weapon sooner if they'd simply looked at the weapon and figured out something better, but they stuck with the and this thing is capable of being made into a magazine weapon, because if you can get it to go this way. In fact, they actually made a shotgun version in the 1880s that had a magazine to it. So you could get a 3 or 4 shot.
So it sounds like you had all the typical Army things that play, right? Or they knew they had the conscript version.
Yeah.
So that it wouldn't be immediately destroyed by guys that had just been drafted or something.
Well, the nice,
It's cheap to cut out the breach of a bunch of muzzleloaders you already have in inventory and replace it with a trapdoor.
yeah, they were already reusing the barrels.
Sure, yeah.
The other thing is that I think the reason why they had Springfield make all of them, not just this one, but the Remington and the Sharps as well, is to prove that the factory was capable of making any new weapon that they were going to adopt. But instead of adopting those two, either of those two, they went with the trapdoor. The fun part is, though, is the weapons they used for those tests, for the Sharps and for the Remington, those weapons continued in use. I think the Navy actually bought some off the Army, and they used the Remington rolling blocks. So something good, but these weren't picked up by anybody. So they eventually obviously ended up at Bannerman's. And when Bannerman couldn't sell them anymore, They made those 3 into hat and coat racks. I wonder if there are any more hat and coat racks out there. Because it was functional. I wish he'd taken a picture of it. I would have brought it, but he was too busy taking the damn thing apart.
So I got kind of a dumb question. Bannerman's? What is Bannerman's?
Bannerman is your very first Army-Navy store. Of course, after the Army never throws anything away. I can guarantee you they still really don't throw anything away. And in the 1880s, this fellow named Bannerman came up with the idea of buying all this surplus off of the Army. They were switching to cartridge weapons, so they had all these muzzle loaders. They had everything. They had uniform. They'd gone through a uniform change in the late 1870s, so they had stacks of uniforms. And he bought them and then sold them to other people. And by the 1890s, he was making so much money. He was in downtown New York, but he had so much ordnance because he was also buying the munitions to go with him. He bought an island in the middle of the river, upriver from New York, and built a castle there and built warehouses and stuff. And he sold shit out of there. Heck, his company was still selling stuff off the island in the 1950s.
So I don't remember seeing advertisements.
You know, you could see the catalogs. Look up Bannerman's catalog. And there's a 1903 one that you can actually go through. Anything you could think of, and whatever, they were buying Gatling guns, all that field artillery that the Army had left over, he bought it. He had so much large ammunition for those big guns, you know, 100-pound Parrots, 32-pounders and like that. He used it as a foundation for his dock. The problem was he didn't demill it. So you're no longer allowed to use the dock because they're afraid it might explode one day. And the reason why he bought the island is the city of New York deemed properly it was too friggin' dangerous for him to do business inside the city. But when you go see the movies, you see these 1920s, 30s, 40s movies, and the uniforms, those are original uniforms. Where'd they buy them? Bannerman's. All these small arms that we see that don't look like this, you know, you buy yourself a Model 1864 Springfield, for example. Looks like it just came off the rack. Guarantee it came out of Bannerman's because he bought them right off the rack. Anything issued, unissued, when the Spanish-American War ended and we captured all those Remington rifles, Spanish, he bought them all. If you have a Spanish 43, it came out of Bannerman's. Because he bought all the stuff that the Americans captured in Cuba and in the Philippines. He bought it all. Chris's, you know, those Philippine swords, he bought them. If it could be bought, he bought it. You could buy a Gatling gun from him with the ammo. What kind of Gatling gun you want? No problem. Cannons? No problem. Whatever the government didn't keep, he bought. And so the government didn't want these anymore. He bought them. When he couldn't sell them anymore, he'd get creative. The other thing that he bought hundreds of thousands of were bayonets. Go to Perryville, and in one of the houses there, it has a candelabra made of these. Go to Germantown, Pennsylvania. You know, they've got a 13-inch mortar out there. The fence that surrounds the 13-inch mortar are Model 1855 barrels with the bayonets on them, all welded to steel, stock steel. And these things are still sharp. You see that and you go, why didn't anybody mess with the cannon? When anybody gets over that fence and slips, they're dead. So he used everything. He finally ran out of stuff in the 1950s, but even the catalogs are collectible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's great. It's great.
But look him up. It's a fascinating read.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, we're too young for that. In fact, I've got a weapon here that I'm bringing that's used that was purchased off of Bannerman for like $50. It's a new model 1863 Sharps.
Wow.
Like beautiful.
It's also, but politically speaking, it's an indication of what direction our country is turned as far as our rights to
Yeah.
keep and bear arms.
Yeah, it gets there. The fun part about owning some of these, though, is literally there are no records. Notice I said, I suppose most people would call this a ghost gun. It's no serial numbers.
That's how far we've.
We won't go there with that. Well, I'd love to see somebody 3D print one of these.
I'll give it a shot. I gotta-
Well, if there aren't any more, I'm assuming that we've got,
And nothing from online.
oh,
Oh, hold on.
oh.
Peter, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you say that again? Is the barrel a sleeved 1861 Springfield?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, you can see the line all the way around. I've got the odd thing is, and I should have brought it in, is I've got a model 1870 Springfield trapdoor out there, could very well have been part of the same test. They built 11,000 of those, though, because they built them 70, 71, and 72. But according to the books, it says, oh no, they were making brand new barrels for the 1870. I call that as BS, because the one out there, you can see the insert inside the barrel. So maybe it's an early one. And by 1871, they were creating them out of new cloth, but not for this one. I'd show the barrel, but I don't know whether it show very well on the thing.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
I thank you. To shoot this with the bayonet on to keep the blast from coming out the holes.
So we're going to reset here, take a few minute break.
Exactly.